I think it's one of the most phenomenal aspects of life on planet Earth that nobody knows anything about.
Because people have this really poor understanding of iron as well. And I think you put it really elegantly in your book that it can suffocate mitochondria.
And so when copper is down, oxidative stress is rising. There's one enzyme that activates 4,700 signaling peptides.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sara, and today I have the pleasure of Morley Robbins as my guest, as he's been studying the relationship between copper, iron, oxygen, magnesium, zinc, and many other molecules on energy production in the mitochondria, as well as the effect this has on organs, hormones, and how this ties into many diseases. Morley's going to walk you through this slowly, as he's been studying this for 15 years, as well as seeing patients and training practitioners. So we've planned a 4-part series for you. I particularly wanted Morley to come on so that he can dispel the myths about copper toxicity, vitamin A toxicity, as well as dangerous misunderstandings about iron by the general public, as well as doctors. The public needs to be made aware of iron that's being added to food and how many anemia diagnoses are completely incorrect because incorrect labs have been ordered or interpreted. Morley's the man when it comes to copper, iron, and retinol, but also he has a huge wealth of knowledge on other aspects of biochemistry. And in part 2, Morley's going to be going over my lab results live so that you can see how he interprets it, and it'll help you understand how to interpret yours. If you like the content, you can reach out to Morley or one of his practitioners. I also have a quantum hormones workshop where you can dive into more about hormones, quantum biology, and lab testing. If you are interested in this course, the links are in the description. And if you use code MOM for my hormones course to get 15% off. Welcome to the channel, Morley. I'm really excited about this conversation because of all the work you've done on the copper and iron dynamics, but also because you understand mitochondria and water and light as well. So maybe for people who've never come across you before, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself, and that we're going to introduce them gently today to this really important subject?
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Sara. It's a real honor to have this discussion. Where to begin? I grew up in a very sickly family, and my sister became a nurse, and I was supposed to become the doctor. I went to college with all intentions of becoming a doctor until I got into the classroom and went, wow, this is really hard. And so I didn't do so well at the baccalaureate level. And I still applied to schools. 18 schools turned me down. And for the longest time, I thought it was, you're just not smart enough. And then I learned later in life that medical schools especially prefer firstborns. I'm a secondborn. What's wrong with secondborns? We question everything. And so the fraternity did not want a rabble rouser coming into their mix. So if you can't become a doctor, you become a hospital administrator. So I went to business school after getting my degree in biology, and did very well in business school. Boy, I cleaned clocks there. It was a completely different experience, and was even invited into a doctoral program, and I pursued that. But then I realized, what am I going to do with a doctorate? It didn't make sense to me at the time. So, especially in business, worked in hospitals for 12 years. Then I decided, well, I want a bigger platform. So I became a consultant. And for 20 years, I flew around the country. I'll never forget, one of the first assignments I had was a very contentious merger up in Wisconsin. And I remember going into the CEO's office of this very elite firm that I was working for. And I said, Jerry, this is really complicated. He looked up and he said, Morley, if it was simple, they wouldn't have hired us. So I endured that experience for 20 years, but I pulled a suitcase behind my back for that entire time and developed what's called frozen shoulder. And I couldn't pick my hand up above my waist. And it was basically my body saying, we're done with that. We're going to go into a completely different direction. Well, it led me to a health food store. I asked them what they had for frozen shoulder. They told me to go see Dr. Liz. I went, I don't do witchcraft. I'm a hospital guy, because I knew that doctor in first name meant chiropractor. And I dismissed it out of hand, and then came back a couple months later and said, you must have something stronger. And by the grace of God, the owner of the store was there. And she said, look me in the eye. She said, Morley, we love you. Go see Dr. Liz. So my tail between my legs, I went to see Dr. Liz, and she healed my shoulder within 2 sessions. And it was a miracle, or at least as close to a miracle as I want to be. And she used a phrase in that very first conversation that I'd never heard in 32 years of working in hospitals. She talked about an innate healer. And I thought to myself, I didn't say anything to her at the time. I thought, if there's a healer within, why do we have millions of doctors around the world? So I set out on a quest to find out who the innate healer is. And so I've written a book about it. It's called Cure Your Fatigue, because I'm a very clever guy. I put a box around the CU. So that gives people the clue that copper is the healer. It's the mastermind of our body that no one knows about. In fact, I donated blood today, and I ended up talking to a physical chemist, PhD physical chemist, who knew this much about copper. He never knew that copper and iron were in a relationship. And it was just fascinating that here's this, he started out his education in Germany, ended up here in the States at Duke, and didn't know diddly about what I guess I would call it the metabolic triangle between copper, oxygen, and iron. And it's just been a fascinating process over the last 15 years now to peel back this absolute tapestry of proof that we have this very dynamic tension in our body between iron, which is basically a waiter, carrying oxygen. That's where the bulk of the iron in our body, over 80% of it, is carrying oxygen one way and carbon dioxide another. And then we have this amazing chef inside our mitochondria called copper that's slicing and dicing the oxygen to create water so we can release energy molecules. And I think it's one of the most phenomenal aspects of life on planet Earth that nobody knows anything about. And that's what guides me in my Google searches every day, is what's the simplest thing I can ask to get the biggest payload. And it's an absolute joy to see what the treasure trove has. And I can't wait to unveil that as we have these conversations, because it's been just a phenomenal journey of discovery. It's like I'm remembering things from another lifetime. And it's all coming so effortlessly now. And I hope during the course of our exchange that we can help enlighten people, both at a very beginning level, at an intermediate level, and then eventually up to a more advanced level, to understand both the simplicity and the enormity of this dynamic and how central it is to our health and well-being.
Oh, absolutely. Because like we were saying, that not to run like stallions and just be tortoises to start with, because we lose people. And I think before we go into explaining to people in simple terms about different kinds of iron, because you can have heme iron or inorganic or organic iron, maybe just sort of a big picture of sort of a couple of really important things that copper does in the body that people had no idea about. For example, I know it's in part of the enzyme that makes melanin, and then it's part of the enzyme that makes collagen, and people are interested in those. But again, just like a very big picture of, I think, because people have this really poor understanding of iron as well. And I think you put it really elegantly in your book that it can suffocate mitochondria. But like everything, nothing's evil and nothing's sort of truly good. But I think copper and also vitamin A, which we'll talk about again later, has been demonized as well. So I think just the big picture of what copper does. And if my mum was listening, she'd be able to sort of understand. And then we'll move into how it does it and what are the different coppers, what's the different kind of iron, oxygen as a molecule, and how copper can split oxygen, and all sorts of the interesting things in the mitochondria. But again, not going too difficult, so people who are new here can follow.
Well, I like to take words and turn them into something that means, and as it relates to the word cure, and that's in the title of the book. I put the box around the CU. But what that turns that word into is copper runs everything. And it's at first I didn't believe it. And as I gathered more information over the years, it became irrefutable. But just to respond to your question, copper creates energy at every level of the body. We have I think most people have probably heard the word mitochondria. They're little organelles that produce energy in our body. But we have 40 quadrillion of them. So that's 15 zeros. It's a staggering number. And copper runs the show. So copper creates energy. Another really important function for copper is it clears exhaust. Many of us are used to driving a car, and we like going forward. We don't pay attention to the exhaust coming out the back unless it's billowing black smoke. We just take it for granted that, oh yeah, I'm moving forward and everything's fine. Well, the mitochondria work the same way. They're making energy. That's good. That's what we want. But coming out the back end is exhaust called oxidative stress. The way the mitochondria work is they transform oxygen, O2, the molecule of oxygen is O2, and there's a process by which copper slices and dices the oxygen and turns it into two molecules of water. So O2 becomes 2H2O. That's the miracle of life. That chemical reaction happens at the pH of 7, can only happen at the pH of 7. But when it does, it releases energy molecules that go over to another complex to become ATP. And many people have heard of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. But there's more to the story. Not only is not only is copper creating energy, clearing exhaust, to your point about melanin, it colors everything inside the body from yellow to black. It's a very wide spectrum of colors, is courtesy of melanin that needs copper as a battery to make it work. Copper connects everything. So I'm hoping that people are catching the alliteration here. Copper, C-E. So copper connects everything. There's an enzyme people have never heard of. It's called lysyl, Lysyl. It's for lysine. It's an amino acid, lysyl oxidase. And 45% of the cells in our body are connective tissue. Almost half of the tissue in our body is connective tissue, whether it's ligaments and tendons and cartilage, the blood vessels, the fascia. There's many, many layers of connective tissue. Well, we need strength, which is provided by collagen, and we need flexibility, which is provided by elastin. So we have collagen and elastin, and they need to be knit together to give the tissue, to give the connective tissue its integrity. It needs strength and flexibility. Very, very important. Then we have another really important enzyme. I'm not going to go into all of them, but just here's a fifth one to reflect on. We've got to be able to turn signaling peptides on. So people have heard of hormones, you know, insulin and progesterone and estrogen, things like that. Cholecystokinin makes our digestive system work. Well, all of these signaling peptides are produced as parked cars. It doesn't do any good to have a parked car. You got to be able to turn it on and get it on the highway. Well, what gets it on the highway is there's one enzyme that activates 4,700 signaling peptides. And it's called the PAM enzyme. And that stands for peptidoglycine alpha amidating monooxygenase. 35 letters long. The doctor's never heard of it. And that copper-dependent enzyme is what turns on the lights in every signaling peptide in your body. So the people who are engaged in hormone replacement therapy, people who have diabetes, people who have all sorts of neurodegeneration are lacking active peptides. And I didn't know any of this. It's absolutely amazing. But what's fascinating is that there's a husband and wife team, Betty Eiper and Richard Maines, here in the States. They've spent 45 years studying this one enzyme, 20 years at Johns Hopkins, and 25 years at UConn Medical Center. Get it? UConn? Yeah. And so think about getting funding for 45 years of research. That in itself is a major accomplishment. But the depth of knowledge they have and that they've shared with the scientific community is amazing. And here's the part that I think people find equally fascinating. All this research that we're referring to is carried out in very elite medical schools. There's a Chinese wall. We have labs on one side doing all the research, and we have classrooms on the other side teaching doctors what to do. The research never makes it over the Chinese wall into the classroom. And so doctors are trained with very significant amounts of information, but their education is not complete. They're great people. They're kind-hearted. They're brilliant. But their diploma is printed on Swiss cheese. There's glaring holes in what they don't know. And I tease doctors, especially ones who have an MD degree. I say that your MD stands for mineral denialist.
Mm-hmm.
They have no regard for minerals. They think they are hood ornaments on a car when in fact they're the keys to run the engine. And that's where the breakdown is we are not born with statin deficiencies, right? What's fascinating is in 1973, a famed MD, PhD named Leslie Clavet, it's a guy, he was a cardiologist. He's still living. He just turned 90. I called him up on his birthday to wish him a happy birthday. Brilliant, brilliant scientist, clinician. And in 1973, he discovered that a lack of copper is what causes cholesterol to rise in the liver and then into the bloodstream. So for that finding to become science, one other lab needs to verify his findings. And since 1973, over 30 labs have verified that Dr. Clavet was right some 50 years ago. Now, what's the significance of that? Statins are the first trillion-dollar product on planet Earth. And so we live in a very stimulating world. Oftentimes it doesn't make sense. But here we have this pioneering research being done 50 years ago that would have solved the cholesterol problem But there's a catch. It's 5 cents worth of copper that would keep us healthy. It's about $10 worth of statins that create the illusion that we are in a balanced state.
On the subject of cholesterol, don't you need 11 coppers to make one molecule of cholesterol?
Absolutely. And so the significance of that is that copper's gift to people on planet Earth is it helps to regulate oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
It has a unique ability to regulate iron and oxygen at the same time without creating any static, without creating any oxidative stress. And so when copper is down, oxidative stress is rising. And the body is designed to make cholesterol as an oxygen sink. To your point, 11 molecules of oxygen go to make one molecule of cholesterol. And it's amazing the intelligence of our body. And yet for 65 years, we were held hostage to this lie that cholesterol caused heart disease. It was born in 1955 when President Eisenhower had his first of 8 heart attacks.
But didn't President Eisenhower smoke 100 cigarettes a day as well?
Oh, he had a horrible diet. He smoked cigarettes, absolutely. But they isolated cholesterol as the bad guy. At least that was the work of Ansel Keys. And why did they want to do that? Because they were desperately wanting to take retinol, vitamin A,
Mm-hmm.
out of our diet. And where you have retinol, you have cholesterol. And so the sleight of hand was to create a low-fat diet. And worldwide, this has happened. I do a lot of my research at Starbucks in the morning, and I'm fascinated at the number of skinny lattes people order because people to this day are afraid of fat. And it's one of the great tragedies of humanity is that we have been programmed to fear fat, thinking that it's going to cause heart disease, when in fact, it's sugar. It's always been sugar that causes heart disease. And that lie was born at Harvard University back in the 60s. And so we have challenges to overcome to get people to understand the truth of what's going on in the body.
The reason I brought up it takes 11 molecules of copper to make one cholesterol, the way in which people who just take things as they are, they would say, okay, if we take away the copper, that means the body's going to not make as much cholesterol. Whereas sometimes you need to explain something a bit deeper, because I know full well people would say, oh, well, if you need 11 coppers to make cholesterol, let's take the copper away and the cholesterol can't be made. But I think, again, because heart disease is such an important point, and although we're going to talk about labs and ferritin, not in this episode, the next one, I think to maybe elaborate on the iron sugar axis and the copper fat axis, and then the oxidative stress, just so people are really clear once again from a different perspective why cholesterol is not the monster.
Right. Great point. So a healthy human being has about 100 milligrams of copper. And we can't really relate to that. What does that mean? Well, 100 milligrams of copper fits on the head of a 1-inch stick pin. So you know how small that is. And so that's 100 milligrams of copper is designed to regulate 5,000 milligrams of iron. And that's how much iron they tell us we need to run our body. It turns out that the iron biologists around the world see it a little bit differently. And in fact, we accumulate 1 milligram of iron every day we're on planet Earth. So I'm 71. Well, 71 times 365 is 26,000 milligrams of iron. That's a very different order of magnitude than 5,000 milligrams. So I've got 5 times more iron. And that's in part why I look older at the age of 71 than I did when I was 20. It's iron accumulation. There's not a lot of mystery about why we age. It's called iron accumulation. And so to your point about who's really ramping up the cholesterol, it's iron. The body is very smart. And if it knows that iron is building, again, if copper is down, iron will be high inside the body. When did they first figure that out? 1928. March at the University of Wisconsin, May at the University of Kentucky, here in the States. So they withheld copper in the diet just to see what would happen. And iron accumulated at a very alarming rate in the livers of the animals. Absolutely axiomatic. Copper's down, iron's up. And so when iron is up, there's more oxidative stress in the body. Well, there's more potential to have a reaction between iron and oxygen. And so the body knows in the presence of high iron, we need to make cholesterol. And what copper represents, it's actually the brake. Copper, when copper is present, the iron is going to come down, the oxidative stress is going to come down, the production of cholesterol is going to come down. And copper, turns out, it's the brake to all of that dynamic. But that's not taught in doctor's school. It's certainly not taught in on the internet because they want living in a state of fear. And again, let's spell that properly, Fe-AR. Then that word becomes iron attracts rust. And that's what happens. When we're in a state of fear, we become magnets for iron. So the important point here is to really see that in this very simple axis, we have copper and iron on a seesaw, but it's a very small amount of copper and it's a lot of iron. And in the world of traditional Chinese medicine, they refer to copper as the general and iron is the foot soldier or the grunt. And so using an example, because I was really intrigued by that general and foot soldier analogy, I looked it up in Wikipedia, and here in the States, in the U.S. Army, I'm not sure what it's like in England, but in the U.S. Army, by law, there are 242 generals, and by law, there's 440,000 foot soldiers. So the ratio is 1,800 to 1. Well, through some digging, I decided to look inside the red blood cell. It's a very important cell. We've got bazillions of them in our body. And I wanted to know what's the ratio of copper to iron? Well, it turns out there's 1 billion atoms of iron in one red blood cell. That's an amazing number. 1 billion atoms of iron. Again, waiter, carrying oxygen, carrying carbon dioxide. There's 740,000 atoms of copper. What's the ratio? 1,500 to 1. So it's very similar to the Army. And so each red blood cell is a battleground between copper and iron. Copper is hopelessly outnumbered, but that's the intelligence and the elegance of copper, is to be able to regulate the activity with iron, to minimize the amount of oxidative stress, and to optimize the amount of energy that the body produces. Again, these dynamics are not taught formally in any clinical program that I'm aware of. I mean, I teach it in a course I have. It's called the RCP Institute, and we have practitioners coming through there all the time. But the average—
That's the root cause protocol institute, and it's easy to find. I'll put your website in the link.
Okay.
But I completely agree. I just want to backtrack to that because, again, with mythology that starts on the internet and people just reading snapshots, they could always say, okay, well, you've said I accumulate iron as I age. Iron can make oxygen behave badly in my body. Therefore, being anemic and avoiding iron and not eating meat must be a good thing then. Whereas that's not the case either, because there's different sorts of iron. So we've got like heme iron, then we've got unbound iron, then we've got iron in hemoglobin. So maybe, again, for people who would potentially misinterpret that and think not having iron in your blood or wherever is a good thing, just sort of unpack that a little bit in terms of the different sorts of iron, and obviously supplements, that sort of iron, got ferrous chloride, and then we've got the magnetic breakfast cereal and the iron filings kind of iron. So I think it's, again, sort of just so it's clear to people, so the information doesn't get misconstrued, which that's what people like to do on the internet, and then it ends up hurting people. Basically, that's why I invited you on, to really unpack these myths really slowly to stop the nonsense.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity. So, the bulk of the iron in our body is in heme, and that would be the dominant by far. It would be about 80%, maybe a little bit higher, but it's far and away the biggest source of iron is in heme iron. And heme is nothing more than like a catcher's mitt that can hold iron. And then oxygen is attached to the iron. And we live by virtue of that relationship. There are some there are components called iron sulfur clusters, and they're very structural. They play a pivotal role, principally inside our mitochondria, is where they have the biggest role. But there are a number of enzymes that need to be iron sulfur clusters. And think structurally. Think of the little erector sets that we played with when we were little. Those are iron sulfur clusters. They have a very powerful relationship in that context.
Aren't they in each of the complexes in the mitochondria as a iron sulfur complex? And also, I think I'd imagine a cytochrome C. And don't the mitochondria actually make these iron sulfur complexes? Because I kind of say they're sort of cages for iron, so it behaves itself, sort of in simple terms, and then it does what it's supposed to do. Because again, iron, we don't want people to be frightened of iron. We just need them to understand it has to be regulated. And yeah, so if you carry on, I kind of interrupted.
No. Think of iron as like a tiger.
Yeah.
And it needs a lion tamer. You better have someone around who knows how to work with it. And so that where things really came off the track, where the train came off the tracks, was back in 1941. At the outset of the Second World War. And it took place in the UK, in Canada, and in the United States. And they started adding iron filings. It's not organic iron, it's inorganic iron. It's literally take a steel bar and scrape iron. And they started adding iron filings to the wheat flour in those three countries. And then after the war, to the countries that we supported and that we fed. And now it's pretty much worldwide. But in 1941, they were adding iron filings. And here in the States, I don't know whether this took place in the UK or not, but in 1969, here in the States, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, wanted to increase the amount of iron in the food system by 300%. So a threefold increase in iron. And 20-some scientists from around the world flew to Washington, D.C. with one question. What are you trying to do? Kill people? And so in a magnanimous gesture, the FDA backed off the 300% and just increased it to 50%. That's still a staggering amount of iron being added to the flour. And then it's important to know that today, there's 9 different forms of iron being added to, I'll just speak for the US food system. Again, I think it's probably pretty much worldwide, but certainly in the US, there's 9 different forms of iron being added. And it's important to know that all 9 have been proven to cause cancer. You're like, why would they do that? Well, the whole basis of this is that the biggest mineral deficiency we have on the planet is iron deficiency anemia, which I've gone on record formally as saying is a bold-faced lie. And maybe in subsequent conversations, we'll have a chance to really tease that apart because there's a lot of confusion about it. But as you point out, iron is not something to be feared. It's something to be regulated. It's something to be very thoughtfully ingested. And let me just build on that a little bit more. We've been talking now for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes. And I want the listeners to know that every second of every second.
I want to thank my sponsor, Lightwater Scientific, who helped me deliver free, valuable information to you and also allow me to have great guests on this channel. Lightwater Scientific produce the purest and most deuterium-depleted water in the world. Depleting or lowering your deuterium has numerous health benefits, from better metabolic health, more energy, greater resilience, less brain fog, increased physical performance, enhanced healing, and healthier mitochondria. Deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen, also known as heavy water, because it's bigger and heavier than regular hydrogen. Even though deuterium makes up only 0.02% of hydrogen, it's found everywhere. Deuterium is a burden to your body because it interferes with the intricate chemical reactions that occur by slowing them down. Deuterium is kryptonite to your mitochondria, and we need healthy mitochondria to produce energy. There's over 60 years of scientific research on the negative effects of too much deuterium on health, and also the positive benefits of lowering deuterium in the body. Lightwater deuterium-depleted water is 100% safe and non-toxic. In fact, it's the closest in structure to the metabolic water that your mitochondria produce. Lightwater deuterium-depleted water comes in 5 or 10 parts per million glass or plastic bottles. So level up your health by leveling down your deuterium today. The purchase link is in the show notes, and use code Dr. Sara for a discount off your order.
We replace 2.5 million red blood cells in our body. It's actually taking place, the breakdown is taking place in the spleen, and the replacement is taking place in our bone marrow, in our long bones, the thigh bone, the pelvic region, the hip area. But the bone marrow in that those long bones hold almost half of the copper in our body. It's a staggering amount of copper. 50%, almost 47% of our copper is in those long bones. And they are the agents of producing red blood cells. So we're tearing down 2.5 million a second. We're building up 2.5 million a second. And this is going on all day long, all night long. And over the course of 24 hours, we make 200 billion red blood cells. It's absolutely amazing. And these red blood cells live for 120 days. But every day, we got to take 200 billion offline. And what's really fascinating about that is that to replace 200 billion red blood cells, we need 25 milligrams of iron. Again, think about the 100 milligrams of copper. Think about the alleged 5,000 milligrams of iron. In my body, 26,000 milligrams. And what I need every 24 hours is a small pittance, 25 milligrams of iron. And that's a bit of a surprise. But here's what will shock you. 24 of those 25 milligrams, 95% of the iron that we need each and every day to replace those billions and billions of red blood cells comes from what's called a recycling system. Formal name is reticuloendothelial system. Took me 2 years, Sarah, to figure out that meant recycling. And so 95% is coming from a recycling program run by copper. 1 milligram, 5%, comes through our diet. And you know who figured that out? Famous team of nutritional detectives, McCants and Widdowson. McCants was a physician, and Widdowson was a gifted biochemist in London. And they did this work in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And their series of dietary analysis is the bedrock of nutrition. But they were the ones who said we only need 1 milligram of iron a day because they knew about the recycling system. So here's the catch. They've moved the recycling system out of the picture, and they're telling people you need 25 milligrams in your diet. And you alluded to the iron fortified cereals. And when I grew up, I mean, I'm embarrassed to tell people what I used to eat as a child, but sugar frosted flakes and things like that, Pop Tarts, lots of, oh my goodness. But in any event, look on the side of your cereal box. They're based on a half a cup is what the nutrient profile is based on. A half a cup.
I took lots of photos of things in the supermarket and all the iron, not just in the US, but in the UK. So I'll put them as a picture in the video because it's hidden everywhere and you need to read it. Absolutely. And then the other thing that I asked Dr. Seneth once about, why does the body not just hold on to minerals? Why do we keep losing them? Because just for people, I know people are really interested in magnesium, and for some reason we have that gets pushed out of us really, really quickly and we have to replace it. Whereas for whatever reason, the body over a long period of evolution holds on to the iron and lets just a little bit out. So I think this is a really important thing about minerals, is we don't need to just take all minerals every day. Certain ones leave because of stress or other factors, and then the body for whatever reason has this iron recycling system, and just to leave it alone and just top it up from just ordinary sort of whole food that naturally contains natural iron, rather than these horrible things that in the supermarkets. And the Pop Tarts, yeah, I did take a photo of them as well, and their iron.
Oh, it's loaded with iron. The thing is, the meme that runs medicine on the planet is you're anemic and you're copper toxic. They want us believing that we need more iron and we've got to get rid of this pesky copper. The truth of the matter is just the opposite. We are copper deserts and we're drowning in iron because it's being added and fortified everywhere in our diet. And people don't realize that. It's wonderful that you've taken those pictures, because in an average bowl of cereal, you might get 70 milligrams of iron. Again, go back to McCants and Widdowson. Back in the 30s, they said, we just need 1 milligram a day. And to your point about holding on or releasing minerals, most of the minerals are designed to be replaced in the diet. And for some reason, there's no mechanism to release iron other than through blood loss. I mean, you're going to get a very modest loss just in the natural process of defecation. There's iron in your digestive tract that's going to leave. Sweating is going to produce some iron loss as well, but we're talking minimal amounts. But a blood donation, that's where you can really get on top of regulating and controlling the amount of iron you have in your body. But all the other minerals need to be replaced, especially the copper. And the challenge we've got now is we live in an environment where copper is missing in the soil, it's missing in the food system, and it's being attacked by chemicals, particularly medicines that people just don't even think anything about. But the challenge we face is
which medicines, because that's another thing that I'm really interested in, is that which medicines, maybe a couple that people maybe wouldn't realize are stealing their copper.
Well, antibiotics would be at the top of the list. Hormone replacement therapy. A lot of the cardiac meds. I mean, it's just they're very hard on the minerals, especially magnesium and copper. And
what about psychiatric medication? Do they deplete copper?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a known fact that they're very disruptive to copper metabolism.
Okay.
Very much.
What about metformin and things like that? Because I know metformin, people want to use it as an anti-aging drug, but it's a very polar molecule, and it's very pleiotropic. So I don't know. I mean, I thought you might, but the list you've given me already has made me very pleased.
Well, the metformin chelates copper.
Okay, yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
Yeah,
So people using it for anti-aging are actually stealing a molecule that as we get older, we lose our copper. That's why we can go grey or we produce less energy. So they're actually taking metformin to, they're actually accelerating the process by stealing all their own copper early.
exactly.
And then they try and sell you a copper kind of patch that's anti-aging but I kind of worked out the copper patch. It's a lot of people are copper deficient. So this patch or this copper peptide, it's just replacing this deficiency of this molecule people have told is toxic and nasty, whereas it's actually a fountain of youth mineral, the copper.
Absolutely. And the patch doesn't really have copper in it.
Okay,
It just it stimulates the
right.
action of copper, but you got to have copper in your diet,
Right. Okay, that's really useful to know because I know the copper peptide, the blue one,
right?
that has copper, but that's really interesting about the patch that no matter what, it's a copper story, and
People feel great. People feel
mm,
great when they're using the patch. When they
mhm,
stop the patch, the symptoms all come back.
right.
So it's not restoring. Again, the whole purpose behind calling it the root cause protocol was designed to get to what's the root of the problem and let's restore the nutrients that we need in order to maintain our health.
Yeah, because also with the copper patch, they just want people to buy more copper patches. Whereas if
Right.
they fix the root problem of why the copper's being damaged or chelated or lost and the iron's building up, then they wouldn't have needed the patch in the first place.
Right. I mean, unfortunately, the adage is there's no money in healthy humans.
Mm. Yeah, that's really sad. The thing is, it's like whenever because that's the thing. Lots of things work, and I always like to understand. Well, people have used this peptide in this patch, and they swear blind it works. What's the common denominator? And again, it's back to copper or stimulating pathways that copper participate in. So yeah, thank you. That was interesting to know how the patch actually works.
So in my contacts, you might not be able to see this.
Oh, I could, yeah, yes.
Those are just the main functions of copper that I've identified over the 15-year period of research.
Yeah, because
And so,
when I asked you, can you list some of copper function? You were probably thinking, oh no, which of 150 things that it does will I
well,
pick
no,
for her? Yeah,
that's just it.
yeah.
And again, we got to go back to the programming.
Mm.
People have been trained like circus bears, and hopefully people have been to a circus and they know what a circus bear looks like. We've been trained like circus bears to believe we need more iron and we've got to get rid of that excess copper. And the physiology of our body runs on a very small amount of copper, the general, and it's regulating this massive group of grunts. Again, think of it this way.
I think people also think, oh, I'm feeling a bit tired. I need more iron in my diet
No,
because I need
no,
more energy. Whereas actually, you need more water out of your mitochondria to power your water battery. So it's one of these things you can. It takes decades to undo this way of thinking, particularly for the lay person or the citizen scientist or somebody that's fed up of centralized medicine and they need to unlearn everything they've learned and start again.
that's right. Well, when
But
I was talking
I've had to do that. I'm sure you've had to unlearn things
oh,
over and
absolutely.
over. Same here.
When I
Yeah.
was talking to the chemist this morning, I wanted to make sure he really understood. I said, I bet you have a kitchen in your home. He said, I do. I said, I bet you have a stove in your kitchen. He said, yes, I do. I said, the stove is made out of steel. He goes, right? I said, does the stove know what's for dinner tonight? He goes, no. I said, does the stove know which pot to put on the pan? He says, no. I said, does it know what temperature to turn on? He goes, no. I said, you need a chef for that, right? He goes, yes. And I said, guess who the chef is? He said, I have no idea. I said, it's copper. And he was absolutely stunned by that. But that's the fact of the truth. That's the absolute truth. How our body runs is this very intelligent mineral. I regard it as the God part of it. Copper has a magnetic attraction to sunlight. Copper has a magnetic attraction to ammonia. Why is that important to know? Sunlight and ammonia represent the beginning and end of life and is regulating everything in between.
But also, doesn't copper have, it changes its magnetic behavior in the influence of different electromagnetic
Absolutely.
fields? So when you change the electromagnetic field, you change what copper's attracted to or not, which again is
Right.
that's where this conversation can go later, because that's sort of quite heavy physics. I just wanted to add something into this because we're coming near to the end of this, and I know exactly what
I
people will
can't
ask.
believe it.
What people will ask about is, can I cook in cast iron
Yeah.
cooking vessels? And also, what about copper vessels? Because obviously copper is a brilliant heat conductor, but also isn't there a particular incident that happened when some copper leaked out of a copper cooking vessel, and this further added to the copper fear
Yeah.
problem? And I also know that that when you measure copper levels in ill people like cancer or diabetes or stress, as not stress, the copper can go up, or an infection. So people therefore
Right.
thought, oh, the copper's high, so therefore it caused the disease, just so people can understand where the copper fear came from. And I definitely remember, I mean, you'll know all about it, the cookware that began one of the obsessions. And just to sort of end on something quite simple for people, because you mentioned a stove and cooking, and
Right.
one of my clients has asked me to ask you about cast iron cookware.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we've been using cast iron for thousands of years on the planet. The key is it's got to be seasoned properly, and you never wash it with soap, but you cook with butter or lard. And it's amazing what it has a wonderful heat distribution, as you know, and it's magical when it comes to cooking.
Yeah.
As it relates to copper vessels, most of the modern copper vessels are lined with nickel.
Okay. Ah.
Nickel's nickel's not your friend. Um, back in the day, um, how did they make beer? It was made in copper vessels.
Mhm.
Beer is meant to have copper in it. There are foods that are meant. I mean, there's fermentation processes that are supposed to take place in copper vessels. Well, now what are they? They're all glass lined. Why? Because they don't want copper in our body. And as we progress in these conversations, people are going to begin to understand what the impact of that withholding of that metal is going to have in their body. But the key is it's very simple. Don't be afraid of iron, but just don't wash it with soap, and don't cook acidic food in it, because that will make it very reactive with the metal.
So what would you say, what would you mean by acidic food?
Like tomatoes,
Okay.
sauces like that, red
Okay.
sauces.
Or just like the obvious, like peppers, and so just cook meat in the wrought iron, like
Exactly. Exactly.
lamb or
Yep.
whatever. Uh,
Absolutely.
okay, so meat, it goes in.
Right. And everyone always asks about the copper vessels. They're used principally in India. And you got to go into the culture that uses those vessels. Why did the Indians, continental Indians, why did they use copper vessels? Because they don't have water sanitation. And so copper is the original antimicrobe on the planet. We've been trained in the modern era, oh, well, I'll use silver. No, silver's not your friend. Silver kills copper metabolism, and there's compelling research behind that. We don't have time to go into it now. But our, our, our real original friend as it relates to managing bacteria, fungi, viruses, and parasites is copper. It is the absolute original mechanism for killing all the pathogens. They've known this for centuries. Its first recorded use was 5700 BC. That's a long time ago, folks. When did it all change? Around the time of the First World War. And a lot of changes were made a little over 100 years ago. Massive changes in farming, massive changes in food processing. And that's when medicines began to change as well. And maybe in subsequent conversations, we can get into some of the weeds of that. But when they started adding NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, oh, that's going to help my garden grow. Well, I got news for you.
Oh, I didn't know you had a ponytail.
Oh yeah,
It's
I do.
cool.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
I'm a Scorpio, so that's my stinger.
Oh, is it?
Um,
Okay. Go lovely.
this, this is a wonderful book by Andre Fossan. He's a PhD biochemist.
Yeah.
It's called Soil, Grass, and Cancer. His hobby was raising dairy cattle. And the reason why he wrote the book was he was really struggling with the fact that copper wasn't getting into the grass and wasn't getting into the milk and it wasn't getting into his customer's body and they were getting cancer. And there's meticulous diagrams in his book to back this up. But NPK blocks copper uptake in the root system. That was done right after the First World War. Oh, where did the NPK come from? Oh, the munitions that they made for the war were being fired up by NPK. What a coincidence, right? And then we had in the 1987, everything changed around the world with the introduction of Roundup, also known as glyphosate. And I'm sure in subsequent conversations, talk about that. But that's the most powerful copper chelator on planet Earth. And it chelates copper. The chelation of minerals is rated on a logarithmic scale.
Oh.
So we know the difference, like in hurricanes. A hurricane of 3 is very different than a hurricane of 12. Well, glyphosate chelates magnesium and calcium at a 3. It chelates copper at an 11.9. What does that mean? It means that it's pulling copper out of the soil 1 billion times faster. And we can't relate to that kind of speed. There was a time when I could run an 8-minute mile. And at that same time, my younger son ran a 4:02 mile, almost broke the 4-minute record. And I thought of that wonderful book, The 4-Minute Mile. But that was twice as fast. We can't relate to 1 billion times faster. And the tragedy is most people don't even know what glyphosate is. They don't know that it's a blanket all over the planet and that it's changing the chemistry of our soil and our food and our body because of its power to chelate copper.
Yeah, that's terrible because Dr. Senef's been on the channel twice, and I think she obviously knows a lot about everything, so she'll know. But again, just to
Oh,
reiterate how bad glyphosate really is, because sometimes people just switch off, but then they kind of, once they start to learn, oh yeah, copper's so important, and you can't just take a copper supplement. You've got to find out what in my body is making the problem, which we'll go into in the next podcast, and how can I test it? Because yes, there is a serum copper lab, but there's also seroplasmin, because I ordered the labs suggested in your protocol. So it's like you said, sometimes when there's numbers to look at, it can help sort of people understand that they can't just guess, or measuring can be really helpful, and there's something they can do about it. But also I think if somebody was, say, deficient in copper, they just taking more copper and not dealing with the glyphosate and all of the other things that we're going to talk about more, and the vitamin D supplements and the zinc supplements and the other things which mess up this very delicate balance, because there's a whole host of things which you'll go into.
Well, I've done 7,500 consults with people over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And I'll go out on a limb, Sarah,
Yeah.
and suggest everyone who's listening to this program is copper deficient.
Yeah.
And everyone listening probably has too much iron. And
Yeah.
we'll explain why I'm so strident about that. But it's what I've been able to do over the years is really begin to isolate these 2 critical minerals. And then there's a third, magnesium, which I'm sure we'll talk about in detail.
And I think
But those,
another thing that's really important I've noticed reading labs is the bar for ferritin is 400 in the UK and 300 in the US, because I've been running labs, and ideally you want it sort of 20 to 50, because mine's 20, whereas people would say, oh, you're anemic. It's like, no, I'm not. It's like the bar, and I think that's the thing that's angered and infuriated me so much, because people think they're all right when the actual goalpost for having iron overload is completely wrong. And I completely agree with you about this iron overload, because they've been deceived because their labs look normal according to the wrong the wrong kind of goalpost or scale. But yes, and also I just think it's again something that people want to just stuff under the carpet. And I'm right to say you can't just fix this, but you don't just go and buy a copper supplement, and that's because that's what some people do. They'll go, oh, Morley's brilliant, I love all his work, I'll just go and buy a copper supplement and expect to get better, and they don't make any of the other stop or start changes that you suggest in your book, and then say, oh, it didn't work, and all they did was take a copper supplement, and they didn't get any labs either. So there's more to this puzzle. That's why we've taken it really slowly, just so that people don't get overwhelmed in the first episode, and they really understand exactly why this is so important, how many lies have been told to them about copper and iron.
And I think that's the key, is we live in a very challenging time.
Yeah.
A lot of things changed a few years ago. I think we're becoming much more aware of the deceptions that have taken place on every level of our lives, banking and education and all sorts of
Oh yeah, sun cream and pharmaceuticals and viruses and everything. I think it's people are waking up now. And I always say to people, you think you've found every single conspiracy or lie, but trust me, there's like 100 more, and there's more. I find more every day, and I can't say I know everything, and every day I'll discover a new one.
Well, when I started this work, as I began to tease apart where I started, because I grew up in a family where just about everyone died of a heart attack, I figured, okay, I'm next. I want to understand this. So when I was able to debunk that, and there's some very gifted researchers and clinicians who obviously have been studying it far better than I have, but it was very clear that was a lie. I began to accumulate all the lies. When I got up to 36 nutritional or clinical lies, I flipped the narrative.
Yeah.
I said, the whole thing is a lie. What is the truth? And that's what got me into minerals. I really to this day can't exactly tell you, other than I was captivated by Carolyn Dean's book.
Oh yeah, she's
Magnesium
brilliant. The
Miracle.
magnesium book. Yeah.
And that got me started. That's where I cut my teeth, was on magnesium. And my younger son suggested I really study enzymes. Thank you, Tom. That was an absolute gift. But that's what really got me started. And I began to build this model bit by bit. And now we have what's called the root cause protocol. And people, I think, are really benefiting from it's really, we dusted off Mother Nature, is what we did. We borrowed
Exactly.
the wisdom of Mother Nature in design.
Yes. I know. I think it's like a really interesting tale. As you can hear now, the bouncy castle's being inflated, and then somebody's going to blow a leaf blower, and an airplane's going over. So the universe is kind of saying, let's time for today, and then I'm really looking forward to the where this is going to go, because I know obviously I know the level it could get to, but then there's going to be a level again that I'm not aware of. So I just want to thank you so much for your time and explaining everything so patiently and slowly. And I really hope that people begin to get as excited as I do about this kind of work.
I think people will really enjoy going through your blood work, because we can then really begin to talk about the different types of iron in the body, what these markers are really revealing, and really challenge this notion that people are anemic. I was studying it just the other day. Came across a wonderful article about it. It was first written about, the first time the word anemia was put in print was a French physician in 1807. And it's just fascinating to think about. Here we are some 200 years later, and we're totally confused about it. And we haven't really mastered what's the mechanism, I mean, I know what it is. I think you feel very comfortable with what it is, but I think our objective here is to make sure that the listeners really have the same level of confidence and mastery of it, because it's all smoke and mirrors. And just because iron looks low in a blood test does not mean it's low in the tissue, because the blood test is not representative of what's going on in the tissue. We've been told it does, but it's not. And there's a lot of preeminent research that's been done around that to prove that the blood is just a transport medium, tissue is completely different, and there can be 10 times more iron in the tissue than shows up in the blood. So we'll talk more about things like that in our subsequent exchanges.
Oh, definitely. And I suppose just to leave it with listeners, stop taking iron supplements is probably one of the most important things, because and also read RTFL, read the effing label, which is on cereal and protein bars and snacks, and you'll start to see how it could easily accumulate, and even on so-called healthy foods it's there. So I think I really appreciate your time, and I'm really looking forward to moving this forwards.
Absolutely. This can be a lot of fun.
Oh, yes.
And hopefully, I'm sure the listeners will have questions, and we'll have an opportunity to answer those questions. And we'll get into some of the more fascinating aspects of this, things that I've just learned in the last couple of weeks, that I've been digging at this for 15 years and just now beginning to discover profound insights about what's really holding us back. And I think everyone will find that fascinating to listen to.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this useful. I just want to thank Lightwater Scientific for sponsoring my channel so I can produce more videos for you. If you want to reach out to Morley or get his book, the links are in the description. And also, if you want to learn more about hormones, quantum biology and labs, then check out my Quantum Hormones course, and remember to use code MOM for a discount. Thank you for watching.